enjoy the podcast too.
What is up? It is Mock Draft Monday, and I am joined by the one, the only. Well, we've established not the only, but the best. The one,
the third at this point, I think, honestly, Joe. Like,
yeah,
we've got a new Blake Murphy, number 7 at quarterback down another school down. So I'm just keep falling down the power rankings, as it were.
Well, you're number one in my heart. So, Blake, I'm glad to have you here. It's always good to hang out with you. We're doing Mock Draft Monday, the thing we do. We got a couple of things lined up here, some mock drafts, some player profiles, a few other little things. Let's say hey to some of the folks there in the chat. Or we got Costanasty, Sup, Professor. Appreciate you hanging out with us. We got Doc's Cards. Let's go. Monty is cooking today. We will talk a little bit about the free agency. We got Drew McWhorter. Happy Mock Draft Monday, everyone. Don't forget to hit that like button. Favorite day one signings. Absolutely. And we will get to that. So why don't we jump right into it and actually kind of get into, we have some signings. There were 4 major signings in terms of free agents they brought in. They re-signed some of their own players like Tristan Cullen and a few other, Blake Gillikin, with some nice little under the radar signings. But we're going to focus on the new acquisitions. We start with Sean Murphy Bunting. For these players, I'm just going to real quick show, here's PFF grades. He had a little bit of a down year with Tennessee, but he's had some good years, former second round pick from Tampa Bay. But the most astute analysis actually of this signing was done by our very own Blake Murphy, who noted Cardinals free agents and his church softball league both have Murphy's Bunting. And I actually found a stock photo of this. And here we have Blake Murphy Bunting. Look at the way he keeps his
that's
focus.
The best AI generation I think I've ever seen. So
yeah, well, maybe a little Photoshop, but I mean, look at eyes on the prize, just really, focused, dialed in. But Blake, since you are the Murphy Bunting here, we'll let you kind of start. What do you think of the signing of the cornerback Murphy Bunting?
Well, I was going to say, first of all, I'm clearly throwing an intimidation stare into the opponent dugout. Like, I'm trying to make sure that anyone else or the guy at first base knows I'm going to be running and I'm going to be holding that bat running with me all the way. So you better let me have first base. No, I think this was one of the places of just getting a veteran cornerback into the Cardinals is something that was needed. He was one of the corners that helped win the Super Bowl with the likes of Tom Brady, of course, back in 2020. So I believe originally drafted by the Bucks, and he was pretty versatile overall. One of the things that we know is he can be an inside or outside corner. I believe he played quite a bit in the slot with Tennessee last year. Slot's usually a bit harder to play as far as a cornerback position mentally, whereas the more physically challenging cornerback spot, that's going to be on the outside. So you're talking about at least someone who you can be able to bring in that can maybe either help with Garrett Williams' development or can just line up on the outside. It feels like that he's probably a Cardinals number 2 corner versus number 1. I'm not sure if Arizona is going to be looking in free agency, if they'll look to the draft. But you're getting a guy in there who all of these guys had one thing in common. None of them were over 30. They're all kind of in their mid to late 20s. This is that second contract. And they all have a lot of starting experience. So that's one of the things that it makes me look at and say, yeah, that's a guy that's probably not going to be as lauded as one of the better free agent signings, maybe not even one of the better ones by Arizona, but he's going to be a solid player for you. And I think we'll see an improvement over some of the rookie cornerback play that we saw the Cardinals kind of had no choice but to trot out last year.
Yeah, and he had a down year with Tennessee. And when you have a player who has a down year in their first and only year with another team, sometimes that's different system, different, whatever. I mean, his second, third year in Tennessee were a little bit middling as well. But he's shown he can play at a reasonably good level, PFF grades in the 60s and 70s, second round pick for a reason. And, when someone like Monty signs one of these guys, you have to remember he scouted him when he was coming out, right? Monty liked this guy. You had to like this guy coming out. They know what they're looking for. And you look at the way New England has done free agency over the years. They don't go after the big players, but what they do is they look for players that fit their system. And I have to imagine Monty is kind of emulating that approach, working with JG. So I'm really optimistic about this. Even if he had a down year, I have a feeling they had a plan here, and this is probably a guy that they think is going to fit what they do. You mentioned he's probably a cornerback too. I think there's a chance they look at him as cornerback one in sort of a transition year, but long term, you need someone I think better than this as your cornerback one. But look at last year, cornerback one was kind of Antonio Hamilton / Starling Thomas the fifth.
And don't forget that Marco Wilson was basically the cornerback one, and he didn't even last the rest of the season with the team.
Right. So even if he ends up being cornerback one this year, Murphy Bunting is still an improvement. I'm hoping they get someone in the draft, but they might be looking at him as cornerback one for this year, maybe not long term. But ideally you'd want him as cornerback two. But I think absolutely it's an upgrade. And you mentioned, and we'll kind of real quick kind of highlight the other players that were picked up. Former Raiders free agent defensive tackle Ball Nichols reached a 3-year deal. You look at his PFF grades, they've been down a little bit. Another one of those situations, right? New team, grades go down. Going to give a little bit of a pass on it, see if maybe it's system, maybe it's coaching. But he's had some good years in Chicago. Guy who has a very good athletic profile. I know Kyle Odegaard tweeted out about this and a few other people that he's very, very athletic. And so, this is his RAS coming out from in 2018. So he's a guy with a lot of athleticism. So I think, again, another guy Monty probably scouted and worked with JG, thinks he's going to fit. Then Justin Jones is a guy.
One thing also I did want to note, at least with RAS, because this is something interesting. You got to just not gloss over that this is a guy who, when he was coming out, was essentially a 313-pounder that ran an under 5-second 40-yard dash. Now, you can at least see part of with RAS, one of the things is tries to put together what's the size look like, is the vertical looks like, what the speed grade looks like, and composite. Depending on the player, there are times where that speed score can pull it up. But one of the things that we see a lot of times with defensive linemen is that athleticism can translate into staying on the field. It's kind of a spot where when you think about like some of those super freak guys, at least there's some guys who will have like traumatic injuries like a JJ Watt where they'll kind of be like explosive but not as consistent. There's other guys where you see them, they actually are able to stay on the field for long periods of time because they're able to essentially move around that well with carrying that weight and carrying it well. As we see a lot of times, there's guys who will go into the National Football League, put on a ton of weight for the role, and then take it all off once they leave, just because you're having to plan. It's not, it's not easy to eat 313 pounds and running around all the time. I don't know if anyone's ever tried NFL workout plans. Like I could probably hit 313 pounds, but you'd see me downing ice cream 3 times a day or something. So that's just putting into some of the context, at least of part of where, when you're trying to build a model type of player that they're looking for, one of the things that I think we've seen is, okay, if this signing is indicating, and then if the next defensive line signing is any indication, athletic defensive linemen, guys who have some burst, is something that they look into.
Yeah, and you talk about that size, like the bigger they are, it gets trickier because the torque they put on their bodies and just, the risk of injury. And so, you look at his size, composite grade, it's a little small-ish, 306, 6'3" isn't small, but he's not a huge defensive lineman. He's pretty kind of average, but good athleticism. And you mentioned kind of, being out there a lot, and, Justin Jones, the other guy they signed, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him. His contract seems to be bigger. I know people question like his PFF grades were lower. I'm not going to put too much stock into that. I think generally speaking, I trust Monty. I think those prices are kind of a function of the market. And I think that for whatever reason, I think there was maybe a little bit more of a market on Jones. But I think, and Alex D'Agostino, I believe is how it's pronounced, tweeted this out. And Alex, if you're watching, appreciate the work you do on Twitter and the writing you do. Something else to know about these Cardinals defensive line signings: Justin Jones has played every game since 2021. Nichols has played in every game since 2019. Ossenfor's adding beefy players who will play similarly to last year's offensive line issues, because we had a lot of injuries right on the defensive line. So that's, I think, an important point that Alex brings up here, is that these are guys who have a history of being healthy, right? And they're not those older players that Steve Keim used to sign, young players with who have played significant snaps and are healthy. So, some people maybe were a little down on these defensive lineman signings as not being as they wanted Christian Wilkins, but like, I think these are guys that you're going to get out there who are going to play, and they still are guys that leave room for guys you draft to get playing time as well. They're going to try to build through the draft, and this is just kind of adding some depth. So I like these signings, even though they may not be as flashy. And then I'll get the last one in here. Then I'll let you kind of comment in general on anything we've gone over. Linebacker Mac Wilson agreed to terms from in Rappaport reported here. His PFF grades now, he has not been a full-time starter except for his first year in Cleveland. But grades have been up and down, but really good last year, really good year in 2021. Again, as a part-time starter. I like this signing as well, but I'll let you jump in and kind of cover any and all of these, what your thoughts are from there.
Yeah, when you're looking at some of the profiles of these guys, like the first thing that obviously stands out is what did the Cardinals do? They looked at and signed 2 defensive tackles, showing that that was the area of least depth, but also they signed 2 of the healthiest guys they could find, and that was almost a epidemic of LA last year, where you'd be like, this Cardinals defensive lineman is out hurt, this defensive lineman out hurt, this defensive lineman out hurt. It really was kind of wiping all of these guys out until it finally reached Dante Stills as like the one guy you could really rely on in the rotation. And the fact that they've gone out and have tried to find more durable guys shows that I don't think that they're looking necessarily with these signings as saying, we're going to go and shoot for a star, but if they're not quite in our price range, Monty Austinfort talked about how they would want to make sure that they could get guys who are at least starting caliber or be able to build their stars through the draft. So being able to have a guy who's like more of an all-around athlete who doesn't necessarily have like a one kind of winning trait, but he's going to be able to be on the field. He can get off blocks and shedding, I think, with Justin Jones is super solid. And then, of course, Nickel is one of the guys, at least, who has kind of been underrated because, like you said, it's one of those signings where you're like, all right, who is this? And then you take a look and you realize, oh, yeah, he's essentially been on the field for the Raiders as a starter for the last 4 years, essentially. And the Raiders, by signing a defensive head coach, were like, you know what? He's a solid player. We're going to go out and get a star to line up next to Max Crosby because they have that defensive identity they're going with. And we've gotten to see at least that some of the mold that we've seen, at least with the likes of a Mac Wilson, he just had not lived up to the draft billing, but kind of found a new home with Bill Belichick. And it did take a little bit of time, but we got to see last year as being able to play. And I believe that his main position was more of a Mike type of linebacker that he'd played, essentially 26 years old for the most part. You get him on a really decent deal. He was essentially I believe, originally drafted out of Alabama. So you're talking about, obviously, there's the Bama pedigree for the most part, was a big recruit. He's also a much, much better fit, I think, for this Cardinals 3-4 type of defense, or maybe even more of what I would say is a 4-3, because you look at Kaiser White, he's like about a 220, 230 pounder, which is kind of the similar range to like an Isaiah Simmons or some of those kind of linebackers that you talk about that are more of those guys who can line up in coverage or run. Last year, he had to play the Mike. The middle of the field took a lot of wear and tear, had a lot of tackles. You're signing a guy who's 245 now in Mac Wilson, who is going to be able to man the middle of that field. Suddenly, if that can free up Kaiser White, and I do think unless they're able to like draft a guy or bring in another guy, Kaiser now can actually drop into coverage. He can rush the passer now. We got to see him actually get after when he did get after the quarterback last year, he was effective. I think it's going to mean that Nick Rallis' defense will be able to actually use him, one of their better linebackers, in the way he's probably was meant to be. We saw him be a star with the Eagles when he was lined up on that spot for the most part, and he was just kind of came out of a day 3 draft pick. Signs with Arizona for 2 years. I think that bringing him in and just getting some of these positions fixed shows just how much work there was to have to do just to kind of get guys into their best role. And I think that Mac Wilson will be able to help with the Cardinals, being able to have a guy who's solid against the run up front, which we saw last year when it got down to the likes of, I think it was Josh Woods, and then the other guy who I believe that they actually re-signed, actually it may have been Josh Woods. They just were really weak. Chris Barnes, that's who it was. Yeah. Yep. They were just very weak against the run, both up front and at inside linebacker. So what are the first 3 things that they do today? Well, they get a starting corner and they go right up the middle of their defense, which was where the weakness was. And I think that's what free agency is for. With Cardinals previously, a lot of times they would draft for need, like, hey, we're drafting Zaven Collins because he's got to play as a rookie. We're drafting a playmaker in Isaiah Simmons who starts against the Niners. This is a new Cardinals operation that I believe is trying to fill needs in free agency, manage the cap better, clear a lot of cap the first year, and then try to draft for talent, bringing in better talents and trying to find those stars through the NFL draft.
And I think you make a good point about Kaiser White, because you have to look at that through the lens of the process, right? White was more the weak side linebacker in Philly, right? TJ Edwards was kind of more the Mike, right? And they both left as free agents, right, after the Super Bowl year. Um, but they brought in Kaiser White and they moved him more to the Mike because of the process of new defense, new coach, bring in a guy who has familiarity with the system, put him in that role so he can help everyone else acclimate to the system.
Yep.
But he was out of position a bit, right? Miscast as that Mike. So what this does a year later, the system's installed. The players that are here know the system better. Kaiser White can step back into his more natural role, and they bring in Wilson, like you talk about. And it's sort of this kind of cascading effect that sometimes when when you take a guy who's playing out of position or miscast in a role that's maybe not quite right for them, and you bring in someone to play that role and put them in their position, you've actually potentially upgraded two positions, right? Kaiser White, you've upgraded the weak side linebacker with White moving to more to his natural position, and upgraded the Mike linebacker by having a true Mike. So there's the potential of this kind of force multiplier effect of this move. So I think these are some really savvy moves. I think this is very reminiscent, again, of how New England has attacked free agency, and Monty's emulating that. So I love it. Real quick, folks in the chat, listen, the chat messages aren't all loading up, I don't think. So if I'm missing your messages, I'm going to apologize. But I want to say hey to some of the folks that have jumped in. We got Omar Lopez, Matt Jeff Mendes here. Thanks for being here. Rafael Castillo, what's up? Monty is doing good. Remember, championship teams are built through the draft. Depth is built through free agency, 100%. Chris Young, Mock Draft Monday, and Star Free Agency. What a day to be alive. Austin Hoy, and he's not a liability against the run, talking about Murphy Bunting actually there. That comment was from back when we were talking about him. We got Red Sea. We here. Appreciate you being here. Michael Richards. Hey, MDM peeps. Keith Davis, appreciate you being here. New season, new TCR. I'm late. Did you discuss PFF grades, these things? I think you just saw that. Hank Hill. Let's go. Best card channel on YouTube. Thank you so much. We got L. Johnny. What is up, my fellow musician friend? Appreciate you hanging out with us. All right. So, free agency, I think it's off to a good start. I like what they're doing. I know some people are disappointed, but this is kind of how I expected they would anticipate. I'm guessing you as well. Like, that it would be kind of these kinds of signings. I think you're right. They built some nice depth. And, with free agency, and I've talked about this before, versus the draft, you have to look at premium and non-premium positions. And when you hit premium positions, free agency, you're going to overpay for those typically, unless you're going kind of for depth guys. Really, the way you really ought to build a roster is hit those premium positions in the draft, which we did last year, and then supplement the non-premium positions in free agency, because those aren't the pricing is a little bit better, and that's kind of what we're doing. Middle linebacker, defensive interior, we're going with value guys there. Cornerback's kind of a premium position, but we kind of got some value there. So I think this is smart as far as how we're doing that. Any final thoughts before we transition to the draft side of things?
Yeah, I don't think it's over for a ways for the Arizona Cardinals. I think that what we're going to end up seeing is that they're going to be bringing in at least another offensive lineman, I would see, to be able to fill in a starting spot, somehow figuring out a guard spot. There could maybe be another corner. The other thing, too, will be interesting to find out is how they attack the edge rusher position, because we saw it was one sack over, I believe, I think it was 5 or 6 games down the stretch, and it was Dennis Gardeck chasing Justin Fields out of bounds, but behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
So it really does capture the fact of when you're talking about the Cardinals and why it's been more of a rebuild, it's because they've needed these key positions. Like last year, they gave up a chance to be able to go and take a top pass rusher because they realized that we're got to go and get that offensive tackle, get a draft pick for next year so we have some flexibility. There's a lot of needs the Cardinals still have. And I think that if you can go and get like a home run, immediate upgrade, difference maker talent, I say go for it. That's why I was like, if you can get, the likes of a Wilkins for 4 years, 100 million, sure, he ends up having his market drive the price up to probably another, I think it's $84 million guaranteed, and at least another $10 million in unguaranteed money. That is one of those prices where you have to look at this Cardinals team and say, is this a team that wants to be able to then overpay in free agency for a guy? And I think the answer, at least for that, is I'd rather overpay for the draft pick and knowing that I've got Monty Ossenfort selecting than I probably would a free agent, at least for this year, when I'm still trying to figure out, are we a playoff team? Are we not a playoff team? I think a lot of Cardinals fans are hoping they'll be a playoff team, but since it's not an expectation, this is a safer route to be able to take. And we'll just see if there's any later gems that they'll be able to find. We did not expect the Josh Dobbs thing last year, and
Yeah.
he ended up getting the Cardinals one more win than I think I expected them to get.
Yeah. And you mentioned edge rusher, and that's a really great point, because when you look at it on defense, I think the three biggest needs defensively were interior defensive line for sure. They needed a cornerback, and they need a premier edge rusher. You can argue middle linebacker, but I think that's a little easier to address. But like, they've addressed all those except edge rusher. But I think edge rusher is one of those positions where they have a handful of guys that are like either developing or kind of middling guys that are kind of, so, guys that are depth pieces. But what they really need is they need that Batman, right? They've got some Robins, they need a Batman, and you're just not getting that free agency without spending crazy money. And there's a couple that were out there that were going to contenders. Huff, you could argue, is the guy. So it makes me increasingly think that they might be looking to address that in the draft. If they do, we're talking first round, like maybe early second round. They need a true number one edge. They don't need to get another guy. As much as I love those middle round developmental guys, like the Baltimore Ravens model of doing that, we've got some of those guys. We have enough Demikajis. We need a legit Alabama first round edge rusher. So the fact that they didn't address it in free agency at all so far, and we'll see if they do, makes me think they might look that in the draft even more. So real quick, let me say hey to Dana. Thank you for being here. Young or athletic player that can at least average and have upside is the name of the free agency so far. If there is a name in this group, it's Mac Wilson Sr. I think he's a great fit. We've got Aaron Van Buren, my good friend. Thank you for being here. Hi, TCR. All right. So we're going to get into the draft side of things. Blake and I have each prepared a player profile, and then we're going to get into our mock drafts, and then I'll let Blake get out of here after that, unless I don't think you want to stay here through all those the mock drafts of the viewers. But let's get into you and I both actually are profiling interior offensive linemen, because obviously that is a really important position need for the Cardinals, left guard to be quite frank, right? So I'll let you kind of get into your first profile, and I've got a graphic here, and it is one Christian Mahogany.
Yeah, no, Mahogany is one of those guys who right now the mock drafts are probably a bit too low on. He's going to be a guy at 6'3", 314. It's not going to be that huge road grader that's like the 320, 330s, but he has a lot of power. When you watch him on tape, you're actually able to see that he gets off quick and the hands are able to kind of push guys back. So a lot of NFL teams, when they are trying to be able to construct rosters, it's all about finding matchups. And what we've seen in the NFL is teams recognized, hey, we can play these two safety high systems, get smaller, lighter guys who can get to the quarterback quicker around those big tackles, or being able to blitz guys up the middle, just forcing guys to be able to have to get rid of the ball quick. The way that you counter that as a team is recognizing, okay, we're going to run the football and jam it down your throats. And we saw the Arizona Cardinals do that to great effect last year with James Conner. We also saw that they had problems at the left guard position pretty much the entire year. There was some games that were better, some games that were not. Right guard was pretty strong. I think that they had originally come up with a plan to be able to use a draft pick, to being able to get one of those players to be able to hop in. They were just not able to really get it done. And you also have to look at Will Hernandez. He's here for 2 more years. You want to make sure that you're getting another guy in the pipeline. So I think you would take a look at a guy who's athletic, who's able to be very smart on the field. Every time you're watching either stunts or twists that are going off, which is where the teams will actually like send a pass rusher on the outside, and then suddenly he'll just come back around to the inside while the other 2 players will drive back, suddenly wide open lane to the quarterback. He's one of those guys that could be your starting left guard, and kind of like how Justin Pugh is for the Cardinals, like a set it and forget it type of guy. And he's got a little bit of a nastiness to him, which is kind of that Jonathan Gannon kind of like, I can't really it's hard to describe. I think it's like one of those areas of where like he's like, I'm looking for killers. He fits that profile as a killer for the most part. So he's one of those players that I think if the Cardinals are able to maybe move up a little bit as far as that, I think he's going to go on day 2, the beginning of the 3rd round. That may be the perfect spot for him. And you may be in a spot where you're looking as a Cardinals fan wondering, all right, they're taking the interior offensive line, the defense needs help. you want to make sure that you're actually not just protecting Kyler Murray, but attacking teams. If you can be an offensive team for the Cardinals that can actually run down people's throats, put up points, and then close out those games, Christian Mahogany's a great fit for that.
Well, Red Sea really likes that pick. Great pick by Blake. He's a very good fit for our system who could be available in the back end of day 2, early day 3. Right now, you look at he's played primarily right guard, but Will Hernandez could move, or they could, slot him in there when he's ready. So, yeah, I love it. Real quick, want to say hey to a couple of folks who jumped in. Paul G, hey, hi, TCR and Bergang. Thanks for being here. Agent 47, what's up, Professor? And Robert Moore, good evening, gents. Sorry I'm late, finishing work at the gym. So, yeah, I think that's a great thought there in terms of, obviously, a guard is a position we need. And left guard in particular, this is a guy who can really be nasty in the run, right? Really got that streak to him and could be there on day 2. I think, and I've got the chart that I do of the kind of the Monty draft strategy and using the Patriots historical kind of analysis plus what Monty has done his 1 year here. And, when it comes to interior offensive linemen, they don't take them before round 3, and really they take them round 4. Like that's the sweet spot. Like they've taken more interior offensive linemen in round 4 than anywhere else in the years that Monty was in the front office there, but they have got gone in round 3. So if they really like Mahogany, they could go after him around 3, but that's as soon as, unless he departs right from that pattern, which is possible, but I think that's one he's going to stick with. I think he trusts his ability to find interior offensive linemen in rounds 3, 4, really in particular. You look last year with Gaines, that's exactly what they did. Yep.
Very athletic.
Mm-hmm.
And I also with the draft picks, I look at this as more developmental of, you may be looking at saying, hey, we're going to either have a new rookie left tackle, so you may need to get a veteran left guard for him. And then if you got John Gaines coming in, at least you may be setting him up for one of those starting roles. You may also then look at Mahogany and say, he's coming in as a rookie. We need to get some talent in there. But maybe this is the year where Gaines ends up being kind of one of those guys you get to try out and play with. And then you recognize, hey, that left tackle we got as a rookie, we also have a veteran left guard next to him. We got to get that left guard who's over here, knowing Will Hernandez may end up being on his way out, getting that next player who's in there. Well, John Gaines may then move over to the center spot, depending on how they feel about him or Furlholt. Or we'll see if that pick hits or misses, coming off of a pretty rough injury for the rookie last year that didn't really get to play a snap the whole season.
Absolutely. And Gaines is a good kind of segue to the player I'm profiling. And I'm going with a much deeper dive, someone who seems like definitely a day 3 pick, maybe even an undrafted free agent, but I think he'll go day 3 for a reason that I'm going to talk about in a minute, because he shares a certain athletic trait with John Gaines. And the player that I'm highlighting is Dylan McMahon.
I think I know why you're highlighting this one too.
I think you do too, right? You know why I am. Center from NC State, 22 years old. He's 6'3", 299. PFF has him like 304, but I think he was 299 at combine. Projection day 3. And when you look at his PFF grades, they're not all that impressive, and not against great competition. So you look at this guy. Now, he did play a number of different positions, guard and center. So he is a traits-based projection, right? And he's a guy that you draft day 3. He's not a guy you look at as a starter, as a rookie. If you start as a rookie, you're in trouble. But there's a particular trait that there's this tweet that went out last year from John Norris that since 2010, just 28 offensive linemen recorded a 4.47 short shuttle or better in the NFL Combine. 24 were drafted. Those 24 on to start 84% NFL games. It's a cheat code. So there's this metric, right? The shuttle 4.47 or better, that if you have that in an offensive lineman, there's a very high success rate. And when you look at with the draft, you're lucky if you're shooting 50% on any position picking, right? Quarterback notoriously is like 33%, right? In the first round. So like, if you have this kind of success rate with guys with this one measure, that is something you pay attention to. And this guy, Dylan McMahon, does have that. He has a 4.45. So that's why Gaines also was on that list of below a 4.47, right? And that's the shared trait. So Listen, this is a guy that I'm not saying I don't want to overdraft him. He has his strength is he didn't do a bench press. The kind of the scouting profile he's that he needs to gain strength to even play at the NFL level. So this guy is not by any stretch a guy that you're going to plug and play. But if you're looking in round 6 or 7 for a guy with one of those multitude of picks we have that has a trait that might be worth bringing in and developing to start down the road, when Froholt is no longer the guy, or even as just a backup, right? This is an interesting guy. It would not shock me if we ended up seeing, Monty looking at drafting a guy like this. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think that one of the things that's kind of crazy to think about when you look at stuff, he kind of measured out as, like it said, like a 95th percentile athlete because of just how quick he was able to go with not just the 10-yard split, but also that shuttle. At 4.33 second or 4.33 seconds, that is a faster 40 time, I believe, than Sam Hartman, the quarterback. Braden Fisk, who at like 315 pounds was at 4.37. He's another freak, at least for the most part. And you're talking about a couple of wide receivers in Troy Franklin and Jacob Cowing went in 4.31 and 4.32 seconds. He's at 4.33. You're like, okay, well, how impressive is that? You're like, all right, who else got 4.33 seconds? Well, it was a running back. That was the other guy who got that. So you're like, oh, so you're telling me he's pretty athletic. So I agree that one of the cases, at least as far as strength goes, I think that he might be one of those guys that if you're talking about a backup offensive lineman who comes in, he's got to gain weight. His arms are a bit shorter. There's going to be questions, I think, about him being a long-term starter in the league because of some of that.
Yeah.
But like you said, when it comes to a lot of the NFL traits, it's better to, in those late round picks, bet on athleticism than it is to try to take a solid guy. And I think we've seen this over the past couple of years because the Arizona Cardinals, I think, had a linebacker that they took out of the Wildcats who ended up just not having the right athleticism or size in Scooby Wright. And they're able to get him. And when you bring him in, you just realize, like he just is not able to keep up with these higher level athletes. And you can kind of see that you do have the ability as a guy to make it in the league, but there's kind of a bare minimum bar. It's almost kind of like if you're on that you must be this tall to ride the ride bar at Disneyland. There's something like that with athleticism for players, because if I get on that NFL field, I may know exactly what that play call is, but I may just get beaten to the route if I'm like playing cornerback. Same thing goes where you'd rather bet on athleticism in later rounds versus trying to say you can take a solid player who has more limited upside. You're hoping that you can find that guy day 3 who's able to maybe not boom in a big way, but you can talk about that guy being productive, being a solid backup, maybe getting another second contract with a different team. It's a lot easier to bet on athletic guys like that. And that's why I do like this as a day 3 selection of Dillick McMahon, especially since what we've seen with the Cardinals is that they're going to be running the ball a lot. They had a good play from their center last year. You want to make sure that you get a good backup, assuming that John Gaines takes a guard spot, or even if he does end up taking over as the future center, getting one of those guys late that you can use who has some interior experience is, I think, really helpful for any NFL team.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said, if you're going to take a shot later, take on the athleticism. You can get him in the weight room and get some strength added, right? But that agility and those kinds of things, those you can't really coach those, right? So, well, we're going to move on to our actual mock drafts, Blake. So we're going to let you kind of go through your mock draft first. Tell us kind of what your picks were, your thought process, and anything that stood out to you, any noteworthy commentary as we go through that. So I'm going to turn it over to you as we get Blake Murphy Bunting with his mock draft.
Gonna be fun nicknames. Yeah. So no Byron Murphy, the 2 here, at least, although that was tempting with everything. But in this scenario, at least, I always like to look at the draft in context, like what players are there, try to look at it in more of a realistic context. And what it really started off with was 3 quarterbacks going before the Arizona Cardinals. I think we saw with Jacoby Brissett signing today, he's just a stopgap type of quarterback. Feels a lot more confidence. It wasn't like it was a Justin Fields, or it wasn't like a Baker Mayfield signed over there. The fact is probably that if you're the Cardinals, this seems to be a good marriage of fit and need. I know some people have wanted to invest on the offensive line, and I think that the Cardinals did do that last year. Obviously, there's another investment to be made. But if you're talking about what do you need offensive linemen to pass protect, or do you need a wide receiver to throw to? And it's kind of, we call it the Joe Burrow conversation, the Bengals had to choose between Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell. And the answer, at least that a lot of people didn't like, was it's not one or the other. It's you need both. And the thing that we saw with the Bengals is, yeah, they made a Super Bowl run with Jamar Chase as a rookie the one year. We also saw this year Joe Burrow took on an ankle injury and was not able to finish the season due to the injuries that he had. And part of that is with protection up front. So it's not a one or the other, it's kind of both. And I think when you look at the investment of the Cardinals last year, I think that leans a little stronger to the wide receiver. And this is also a guy in Marvin Harrison Jr. who he's such a freak that last year at the Ohio State's Pro Day, there were NFL coaches who came to watch the other receivers, watch CJ Stroud throw. They were just kind of gawing over Marvin Harrison Jr. You're talking about a guy as smooth as his dad, who's 6'4", about 215 pounds. I don't think that he's quite in that Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson type of range, who's just like this can't miss like prospect, but I think he is the top prospect in the draft. And in some ways he fits the modern game a bit better because not only does he have the length for those outside shots, but he does have the ability to be able to make up after the catch, be able to, a lot of the times I think his yards after the catch was lower in college because you look at the scheme and then also see on tape, he did a good job of protecting himself in a lot of ways. It kind of would remind you of like a Larry Fitzgerald, where you would see Fitz would get the ball and he wasn't necessarily the best yards after the catch guy, but you would be able to see him have a second gear that he would get into when that was needed. I think Marvin's kind of the same way. And then round two, I went with, I don't know if you have any other comments before at the end of round one, but I went with a very popular pick in Tyler Guyton because he's a very good athlete. You've seen that he needs a little bit of development, but the type of athlete and blocker he is in space, I think that you bring him in, have a veteran left guard you can start next to, and at worst case scenario, you have to start a tackle and maybe kind of work him into your roster. I think that either of those are fine. It's also a spot where the Cardinals can kind of afford in this area to be able to say, yeah, we're going to take a guy who maybe he's not ready to start as a rookie, but we're looking at this as a long-term scenario for building this team. Even if you got to put a stopgap guy in there, I think he's too good of an option to pass up there. And then third first round pick, a little surprise there. I actually moved up for that fifth year option and addressed the edge rusher spot by getting an athletic and rangy edge rusher in Chris Braswell. So here I was like, you fix two spots on the offensive side and you try to get a Batman to the Robin is what I looked at for the first round.
Yeah, real quick. And, you talked about receiver versus tackle. And I know a lot of people have talked offensive tackle first round, especially early. And I think looking at Monty's kind of what I think his draft strategy will be, again, leaning on the New England history. I think they're going to look, I don't think they're going to go tackle super early. I think they went tackle early last year. They see Paris Johnson Jr. as the left tackle of the future. And I think Monty believes he can find a right tackle a little bit later. Now, maybe a little bit later is round 2 or round 3. But I'm just not convinced they're going to go tackle early, if Marvin Harrison isn't there or if they trade back. Real quick, Daniel Corrad saying, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a pipe dream for Cardinals fans because I'm convinced Monty will trade out of the first round altogether. I don't think he's going to trade out of the first round altogether. From the fourth pick, trading out altogether, you'd have to do multiple picks. And you get a lot of future picks, but I don't think he's wanting to kick the can down the road that much. I know the New England model is to trade back some. They like second round picks, but no, I think he's picking 2 players in the first round this year at least.
I could see him saying that Monty trades out of the first round. I don't know if it'd be all together. I could see him trading down from pick 27, depending on if there's not a guy that they have on the board, because some other team wants to move up for a quarterback, and you can get 2 kind of early second round picks to get some guys that were first rounders on your board. I think that could be definitely realistic for the most part, and we'll see what goes on. The interesting case, I think, 2 years this. We've seen the Belichick model. We've even seen Monty with the Titans model. Those were playoff teams. We really hadn't seen what Monty Ossenfort had done with a team that had a top 3 and now a top 4 pick. What he did last year was he didn't move any lower than 6. He traded back, but then traded back up to get that top talent. I think that either he doesn't trade back, or if he does, I don't know if he goes any lower than maybe 6 or 7 to be able to keep that top talent in tow. And I think that's one of the changes that we'll have, because Cardinals have not been a playoff team long enough to see, and I think GMs do behave slightly differently depending on where their team is, where their team's positioned in the draft.
Yeah, for sure. So you're next. You got your guy Christian Mahogany, who you profiled right in the third round.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, I was going to say the last thing I was going to say with the
Oh yeah,
Hopkins, and this is from Seth Cox. When you look at the stats, at least as far as does Kyler need a number one receiver, or can Kyler create a number one receiver, and you just have to add
yeah.
the tackle? One of the things that really stands out is when the Cardinals added DeAndre Hopkins, there were times Kyler had him play, and a lot of times he didn't play. Seth Cox, who is our site editor at Revenge of the Birds, looked it up and saw that Kyler had 16 more touchdowns with DeAndre Hopkins in one less game. So you're talking about essentially 50-50, but 16 more touchdowns. Why is that? Well, when you have a top receiver who's got that height, you're able
Mhm.
to see that's what really is effective in the red zone or on big plays where you can kind of chuck it outside deep. He beats his man. We saw a lot of those deep plays in 2020, especially to DeAndre Hopkins, and 2021. I think of the last play against the Packers before he got hurt, where he kind of fakes out the one guy. I think that you do need a tackle, but a lot of people have just been like, do the offensive line, protect the quarterback. And we saw last year their passing offense wasn't good. Rushing attack was great. I think that you just put wide receiver first. But like I said, I took both in this mock draft because I do think that the Cardinals need both of those guys when it comes to answering that question. Mahogany adds to all of that whatsoever as well, being another athletic interior offensive lineman. I think that the other case with John Gaines is if John Gaines ends up being your future at center, I could see Christian Mahogany actually being able to plug into that guard spot for the most part. I think Agent 47 actually was wondering about that as far as if they would take a center or not. I think that if John Gaines moves over to that center spot, we saw that with Steve Avila actually moved from guard to center for the Rams this year. I could see that being one of the guard spots that gets plugged in. And then I went with Jalen Wright as a halfback because he's a guy at 6'1, 225, and with some of the athleticism that he had, it doesn't seem like it's as much of a need when you've got a decent running back room like the Cardinals have. But there's two things that stood out to me. The first one is he's a 20-year-old. He's a lot younger than some of these other players that are like super young. And usually guys, when they declare and are already stars by the time they're 20, it's a big projection for them at the next level. It just means that they were a dominant player very early on to the point where they
Yeah.
could leave. And he's also one of those guys who he just the way that he kind of runs and moves around for the most part with the size. He isn't the most athletic guy for the most part comparatively, but neither was James Conner. Where he's really good for the most part is that he's got a lot of explosive speed. He ran a 4.38 40-yard dash. He's 5'10, 210. So you're not talking about this 5'9, 190 pounder. You're talking about a big back. He did have an explosive broad jump at 11 feet, almost 40 inches vertical jump. I think that that's one of those places of where you look at what the Detroit Lions did last year. A lot of people, like, oh, they took a running back first round. And then you saw in the playoffs just how explosive Jameer Gibbs was pairing with David Montgomery. I think that you could be getting a future star in Jalen Wright with that speed and that size combination. And I just didn't feel like I could pass up on adding that to a great Cardinals rushing attack. Like, imagine having, you're like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We've got Rondale Moore standing here in the backfield. We got James Conner standing back here. You've got bring in Jalen Wright, and then suddenly Rondale Moore splits out over into the slot for the most part. You're able to just have all of these different types of weapons that you can attack with out of the backfield, and then Kyler Murray himself can take off too. I went more offensive heavy, I think, in this part because I looked at free agency as being the place to try to find some of the star players and defenders. And after some of the trades, a lot of the guys who I would have liked on the defensive side just were not really there on the board. I didn't want to pass up a chance at Cade Stover because I do think that the Cardinals, with how these two tight end sets are, getting a solid wide receiver up front to be a star. And then I would probably trust that tight end too, similar to how they did last year, of getting a guy who's a good blocker, getting a guy who's got experience. That's one of the places where I think having him as that second blocker on a lot of the different downs who can also pass catch, just like we saw last year with Jeff Swaim, getting a guy like that on a rookie contract, I think to pair with Trey McBride being kind of your star, I think it would lean to, hey, you're going to get a slot receiver somewhere around the road, whether it's Storage, if Hollywood comes back, you're going to get that guy. Having the offense run through Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and then having another tight end who's able to be on the field all the time, I think that is pretty effective. I grabbed a future safety. Buda Baker's in his last year. I think you also want to make sure you can find special teamers at this route. I went with Miles Murphy, who I actually have liked a lot more. This was the actual, like, when I was making a joke about Byron Murphy, I thought about drafting like as many Murphys in a row. He's really interesting because he's one of those guys who, when he comes out from the, I think it was UConn, a lot of the times those guys are a bit more athletic than normal as far as for some of the different players. He actually had a pretty high athleticism score. He tested in as a defensive lineman. They put him on the edge. He'd be at 6'5", 268. He actually tested into being the 7th highest athleticism score for an edge rusher at the NFL Combine. And this is a guy that's falling all the way down to round 5 that you're seeing with each of those. I think it's one of those spots where you look at the Cardinals on the edge. They've got to build guys, put people into those roles. He has the prototypical size and strength. You talk about how Zaven Collins at about 6'5", 260 had the prototypical size, but he moved around, was more of a tweener. Murphy is specifically like an edge rusher that you can line up there. I really thought that was fun. Then Frank Gore Jr., of course, this was partially a draft pick that I think I made just because he does have a bit of pep to his step. It's weird to see about 2 halfbacks drawn, but I think part of the reason I drafted him here, and you can see they gave a grade D, was because it was picking just in front of the 49ers in this mock draft. I just thought it would be very interesting and kind of fun. And then last, I had to get another guy in, an AJ Woods, who fell all the way to the back. I think that he could go a little bit earlier for the most part. So really, outside of the one draft pick, at least, of Frank Gore Jr., which I think was more of just me kind of being a little bit of a troll in the late spot, I would say, hey, if you can trade this draft pick away for the most part and take AJ Woods there instead, that's what I would certainly do. But I really liked how this draft turned out. It felt like that you essentially can say, as long as they bring in some of those starters on the defensive side, you're drafting your stars on offense, you get that Batman edge rusher. There's a lot to like about the Cardinals here for, I think, next year, where a lot of their needs are filled, and you feel pretty good about them heading into 2025 with these guys on the roster.
Yeah, I love what you did here. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously. We've got Josh Butson here from the No Butts About It podcast. Hollywood Brown's market is heating up. At least there's a report of that. We'll see. Assuming he leaves, is Marvin Harris Jr., Rondo Moore, Michael Wilson enough to roll out with? Well, don't forget Trey McBride. Trey McBride is a big part of this offense. So if they had that, if they had Harrison Jr., Rondo Moore, Michael Wilson, don't forget Greg Dortch as well. They extended him. Greg Dortch. So if you have Greg Dortch plus those gentlemen plus Trey McBride, they would have someone else in the depth chart, maybe another rookie, someone later. I would feel pretty good about that as a future, kind of a to build on. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's plenty, I think, to build on, because like we said, this is a different team. I think we got so used to the Cliff 5 type of receivers and a lot of other places that were there, that I think a lot of times it was easy to forget, at least, that last year the Cardinals hired a coach who came from the Kevin Stefanski system, who kind of came from the Shanahan school of thinking that had this West Coast timing-based offense with heavy play action under center. And in order to run it properly, you need to have a tight end who essentially can line up on the field, and you're going to either draw a linebacker who can't cover him going north and south, or a safety who's just so small that he's going to be able to fight his way back to the ball. Obviously, that end of the game Falcons catch where he kind of was able to fight back against that cornerback and get back to the ball. Put stock into Trey McBride. Recognize if you got Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, and you already have a James Conner on your roster with Kyler Murray, that's more than enough weapons. I think last year a lot of the issues with the Cardinals in the passing game was you kind of needed Michael Wilson to be able to step up, and he just was not able to stay healthy throughout the majority of the season. Had a couple games where he had like 2 targets, no catches, and Hollywood Brown just was not able to kind of step up. Once you got to see that mix of guys come in, with the likes of Trey McBride being the main target, with Greg Dortch getting a bit more, this is kind of a, hey, just add a receiver at least that Kyler can just throw it up to and come down with it, and you'll be cooking with gas.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, Jay, thanks for being here. Jay Green, hi everyone. Then we have a question from Nisha. Good question. Likelihood of Kenny Moore coming here? Like, my opinion is I don't think so. I think we signed the veteran we're going to sign. I think the rest of the cornerbacks are going to be the guys that they're developing and or draft picks. You only have room for 4 or 5 cornerbacks on the roster. And obviously we've got Garrett Williams, we've got Keitrell Clark, and then they brought in Murphy Bunting, and I think they're going to want to draft someone. So I don't know that they're going to bring it. And Kenny Moore's primarily a slot corner, right? So I think, between Garrett Williams and Murphy Bunting, those two are going to have to duke it out for who gets the slot snaps. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, between each of those guys with Garrett Williams, you got Keitrell Clark is over there. At least Murphy Bunting can play both. He's more of an outside corner. I think bringing in another veteran slot corner only really matters, at least if you're feeling like, hey, we need to actually get this slot spot locked down. I
Mhm.
think that they're going to be more likely to let Garrett Williams kind of have it be his job to lose. And maybe there's a veteran who gets brought along later in the process. And I think that they would prioritize the other outside corner spot first and then
Yeah.
see kind of where the draft would fall if they're able to get that outside corner. I think right now you're looking at a wide receiver heavy draft, offensive line heavy draft. And I think that's going to actually mean that while a lot of those picks go early, it means the teams that really need corners are going to take some of those guys, I think, before the Cardinals get to them. So you're hopefully going to be able to be in a spot where you can grab one of the other corners at least sometime later in the draft. But it may be one of those spots where we get through the year and go, well, guess they're taking a corner in the first round in 2025 because that's what's left on the roster.
Right. Yeah. Real quick, we've got PL. Thanks for being here. Deontay is no better than Hollywood. Drew McWhorter was asking about interest in Deontay Johnson. I know that had been thrown out there by a Twitter account, but I think that's just people throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks. I just don't think they're going after someone. I think they're drafting a receiver. I don't think they're trading for a guy who they're going to have to pay. Nisha, here's one for you. How about Peyton Wilson, third round? Oh, I love that. Like the linebacker out of NC State, I think, right? Super athletic linebacker. I know there's some folks who really like him. So if he makes it to third round, I mean, you never know. He might go late second round. But I would love to see him go. Oh, time with Deontay Brown.
That's an interesting one because I think a lot of people, we look at the process, we look at the tape, but one of the things that's really interesting about that, and I'll bring up a name at least that would be there, is the benefit that you would get from Peyton Wilson, because again, he's had a lot. He's had a high school knee injury that he basically missed all of 2018 from. He only played in 2 games at least because he's had multiple shoulder injuries back in 2021. He's a 5th-year senior. He's one of those guys that when you see him on tape, you're just like, oh my gosh, this guy is like incredible. Like he looks like he is one of those like next big things as far as super big, explosive, rangy. But when it comes to injury history, a lot of times that will be a reason where guys will dip down the board a lot later. And we're talking about linebackers. Like not only is that 2 knee injuries that's there with the shoulder injury and shoulder surgery, you got to tackle as a linebacker. Yeah. I think he's proven some people wrong and obviously showed up as a freak athlete, but it wouldn't shock me if that people are expecting him to go kind of day 2 or 3, but maybe he actually, or I should say round 2 or round 3. Wouldn't shock me if the earliest he goes is round 4, because a lot of teams are going to say, hey, we don't want to take that risk. And if you want to mention a name that's scary, you mentioned the name Reuben Foster to Niners fans. Like, who was the last guy that came out with severe like shoulder concerns and injuries who was a absolute stud? He was an absolute stud, and he never made it to his second contract, was the 31st overall pick, and he was not on the Niners after the 2018 season. That's where I think a lot of people, when the teams are going to have that medical info, just looking at it from the outside, I think that it's going to be that he goes later than people think and goes on day 3 as a result. I think that you would have to feel good enough about the medicals. And from what we've seen with the Cardinals, if you think that he can be like a star and you want to kind of fire that bullet and you want to do that on day 3, hey, I'm fine with it. Even as early as maybe like round 4, unless you see like a guy who's a round 2 guy on our board is still there at the earlier 4th round pick. I'd say take that. It's kind of like the Tyrann Mathieu situation. Cardinals took Kevin Minter before they took Tyrann Mathieu because they wanted to get like a safe pick that they knew was going to stick on their roster and get some playing time before they took that risk in Tyrann Mathieu. I think if the Cardinals do something similar here, I'd have no issues with them taking rolling the dice in Peyton Wilson, because a lot of it is dice rolls anyway, where you just want to make sure you can get good players into the building, but they've got to be players who are available. That's the most important thing.
I love taking a linebacker on day 2, like late second round or in the 3rd round. I think you get that's, I mean, Steve Keim, the whole thing, his first round linebackers, his whole deal with that, but you find Pro Bowl linebackers, inside linebackers in the 2nd and 3rd round, right? If you that you find a lot of them there. There's good value there. You don't want to overdraft in terms of getting too many players that early, but if you draft yourself one solid Mike linebacker in round 2 or 3, that's to me the sweet spot for that position. And then you kind of fill the rest of the depth on that with maybe guys later. Let me get a couple more comments that we've got here before we jump to mine, and some folks that have jumped in here. We've got Trey Trayvon 2K player saying we need to work on offensive line, LT or right tackle, which we need. Yeah, we talked about that. Josh saying take Jonah Williams, please. Think he's Josh Butts is a Bengals fan. Hey, I wouldn't mind him. He's versatile. He could play right tackle or left tackle for us as long as the price isn't too much, right? We've got John's. I'm going to butcher your last name, Season. Second, I apologize. I'm sure I got it wrong. Do you agree or disagree with PFF and their stance that there's a lack of quality depth in this draft class, late round picks being less valuable compared to previous years?
I agree with that, actually.
Yeah, the guy who does the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, he tweeted out about that like just for a couple different reasons, NIL money, maybe some other things, residual stuff from other things that like there's a lot the depth there isn't quite there, and that there's a lot of the guys that are going to be drafted late in day 3 that would have been undrafted free agents normally. There are some positions that are deep, but it does seem like the depth overall from the things I'm hearing is like that. So
this is a class with, like, you just look at a big school like Ohio State, JT Tuimoloau, Travion Williams, I think even Ty Hamilton and others. They got 9 returning starters from one of the best teams in college football last year. You're like, okay, normally these guys would get their head start, get that NFL contract. What are they doing instead? They're looking at NIL money and being able to actually boost some of their draft stock up, because this is a pretty top-heavy NFL draft class. If you can be the top running back in next year's draft, and this is a weak running back draft, and still get paid to be able to go back into Ohio State, then it's kind of a spot where you're like, you know what? Let's go ahead and recognize that the draft is going to get lighter on the back end. The other thing that's popped up is the transfer portal. It used to be like you could find these gem players. Like I think of a Rodney Gunter, who is at least at some nowhere school. You can find that guy at a small school. What happens now? Well, the transfer portal, you can actually just transfer almost immediately. You go from that small school after you blow up, move to a bigger school, and then if you can blow up again, you can be able to either make more money at least, or be able to get a higher draft selection. That's one of the things that's taking away some of the depth in the later rounds, and it's part of why the Cardinals having 6 top picks in the top 120 is actually pretty good year to have that out of all the other years we've seen so far.
For sure. Well, I'm going to jump to my mock since we're pushing an hour, right? All right, here we go. Hit some similar positions to you, and we'll talk about this. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. was gone. Okay. So I traded back and got Rome Odunze, who to me is, if we don't get MHJ, that's the guy I like. He's bigger, of the next 2 receivers, he's taller. I think there's fewer questions about his off the field stuff. In fact, he's kind of his character's one of his strong points. So I like Rome Odunze as if we have to trade back. Then I traded back just a little bit to get, I didn't like, the positions I wanted to go with late at 27 there, I felt like I could go back and still get someone. And I did. I got Khalid McKinstry, got cornerback. And then in the second round, Jordan Morgan. So got that offensive tackle who, but in the second round, instead of earlier. And then I went with Chop Robinson, edge rusher. So I didn't go edge as early as you did, maybe as early as I would like to, but went with a guy who's very athletic. Yeah. Just the production isn't there in terms of sack number, but the PFF grades are high and really good athletics. So I really like that. Also went running back, just went with a different player in the third round now. And, that whole draft chart thing I have, the Patriots like going running back on day 2, right? They don't go super late. They go second and third round. So I went with a running back, a guy to kind of add to that, and then went with a different linebacker, right? Junior Colson out of Michigan. Also, I've got a lot of third round picks here. Added a few, I think, in the trades. Then added the defensive interior line with Tavondre Sweat, big nose tackle. Now, obviously, this was before the signings. I still think we should draft at least 1 defensive lineman, if not 2. I also went with a safety, Cameron Kinchens. I've been going with safeties a lot in my draft, even though we have the 2 safeties. They like those 3 deep shells, right? And I think you want to build for the future. Get a guy who can, become that starter when and if Buddha moves on or retires or what have you. I don't know. He may not, he's got 1 year left on his deal and they may not bring him back. Right. And
he does have one more option. This is something I found out when I double checked the contract. I think it was Jess Root pointed out they could option him for 2025 and then he'd be unrestricted after that.
Okay.
But it is one of those interesting places of balancing out, like, is that the best way to just treat a player? Like, we're going to hold on to you until you're 29, and then you can go and sign again when most people are moving on from safeties? Or
Mm,
is it going to be more valuable just to try to keep Buddha around, recognizing he's still one of the top paid safeties in the league?
yeah.
Lots of ways you can kind of figure out how to measure all of that out.
Absolutely. Most of my mocks, I grab a safety for depth at least. And if not, a guy who can play some in the future. And then they also move some of those guys into the slot some. So there's a little kind of moving around there. Apparently Josh likes my Ben Snott tight end out of Kansas State. And I've been also getting a tight end late, usually on day 3. To you grabbed one, and I Snott's a guy who's kind of versatile, can move around a lot. So I thought he was a nice guy to complement Trey McBride. And also one of the things I noticed, I've looked at this before, looking at Philadelphia and Cleveland, right? The two organizations that really our coaching staff are coming from, right? The offensive, obviously, from
And the
Cleveland.
Vikings under Mike Zimmer. That's the other
That's a
one
good
you got to
point. Yeah,
remember too.
that's true. Yeah. But I looked at this again just today. I look at their rosters, and because and what I saw before is what I saw today. Most of the tight ends on their rosters are between 6'3" and 6'5". They don't get a lot of those 6'6", 6'7", big Max Williams kind of guys,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
They like the Trey McBride's a perfect fit size wise, right? And so when I'm looking at tight ends, it does seem like they like more the athletic receiving tight ends with who can do a little bit of blocking. And Snott is that kind of guy. So with tight ends, that's kind of what I look at. Then I got another defensive interior lineman, Juwan Briggs, just kind of, in the 6th round, getting some depth there, seeing if they can, capture lightning in the bottle again, like they did last year. I got another cornerback in the 7th round. They like taking cornerbacks, or at least the Monty kind of projection I have, the almighty chart, as we call it, in the 2nd round, but also again, late in day 3, like 6th and 7th round. They like to grab cornerbacks. New England does there. So grabbed a guy who had good grades, Josh Wallace out of Michigan. Then obviously Dylan McMahon, the center that I highlighted. And then they also like taking receivers late, kind of in New England. So I went with Hayden Haddon, kind of, he's 6'2", 205, just kind of a big receiver. Good production at a lower level of competition, right, with Idaho. So that's kind of what I got there. So I will let you kind of chime in and give your thoughts on this, Blake.
Yeah, no, I think this is one of the spots at least that's interesting because I do like at least the explosiveness that you do see with a Malik Neighbors, and I felt like for a while that he would be the pick, at least if the Cardinals weren't going to get Marvin Harrison Jr. The Cardinals don't seem to be thinking that way from what I've heard, and I've kind of had to be like wrestle with it overall for the most part because usually with one of these wide receivers, one of those usually just doesn't end up turning out the same. Now, also you get classes where all 3 of them end up becoming legends, so that happens at least too. And I think that they're one of the biggest things that I think really did sell me on being able to put Rome at least over Neighbors is I think you need talent, and while he does take a lot of the top off, can get like the quick passing game going, a lot of what we've seen that Kyler Murray has been able to like is being able to take advantage of one-on-one matchups outside and throwing that fade ball. And that's one of the places where I do think that Roma Dunze, he's just a little bit better at it than Malik Neighbors. I think that he's a bit better as far as for that. A lot of people, I think, are putting a little too much into the size targets. Like, oh, he's 6'3" that's taller than the 6-foot guy. I think that when you're talking about that, when you're trading back like you did to pick 8, you're probably not going to get Neighbors there because he's an explosive level that usually will end up being like, he would have been the top receiver here just because of that explosiveness going in the low 4.3s. He's probably going to be one of those other options you can get with the trade back. And here, of course, you're trading back just ahead of Chicago, breaking Bears fans' hearts. And then Kool-Aid McKinstry, he's seen his stock take a hit. I think there's still a really talented player that you've seen on there. His smarts and savvy, he started at least as a freshman, had one of the kind of better runs, at least as far as Alabama cornerbacks can go. I don't think has basically been able to kind of cement himself as the top corner or maybe even a top 2 corner. Terry and Arnold, his teammate, seems to have that full package with the athleticism to go ahead. But when you're talking about a smart type of player, you're talking about a player who knows what the play call is, will run. And a lot of times you saw him break up passes and he would come around with late hands, and a late hand. You say late hands is exactly what you want to see in a cornerback. You don't get there too early. You're not basically tackling the guy, which is a problem that we would see. And he's not a guy that would get faked out on some of those routes. We would see kind of Marco Wilson last year had times he would just lose guys, just didn't seem to be able to read the routes correctly. He's a smart player. I think being able to move back a few spots, getting an extra round 4 pick, and being able to still get a starting cornerback now. Again, like we said, you got to address a couple other positions, tackle and edge rusher. And you do that. And I think that Chop Robinson, at least I know people see the Monty Austin Fort gif of him just kind of going like, ooh, I got the shivers there. You want to look at with edge rushers, and this is a good question, I think, at least, that pops up for the most part from some people are actually arguing about that between Daniel and Drew and some of the chats, because he did have poor production at Penn State. And a lot of people are like, yeah, there's good stuff that he did for the most part like that. There's an explosiveness that you can see. What I usually have gone from, and this is the sentiment I share with Seth, is when it comes to edge rushers, you want to basically have a guy who is productive and athletic. Now, if you can't get that, would you rather have a guy who's not athletic and productive? That's fine. Or a guy who is athletic but wasn't as productive. And then there's the last type, which is not athletic and not productive. Those are the guys you want to avoid. Chop Robinson has high athleticism with lower production. Based on the tape, I think that there's a lot of that area where I could see it being with him as like a Hassan Reddick type of explosiveness, where despite not having the amount of sacks that you saw as a Cardinals player, in the right fit and scheme, we saw how Reddick was used. I think Chop Robinson could do very well. But I think that you can put too much of a premium on athleticism. At the end of the day, it's like you don't want to basically pass on a productive player who's athletic just to kind of take a look at the athlete. I think you're taking him in the right range here, either pick 35 or 43. And with Jordan Morgan, I have a question, which is, do you see him as a tackle or as a guard? Because a lot of the NFL sees guys as guards. I think usually I would say try them out at tackle first and then move them to the interior, because tackles are that much more valuable. But he could be one of those guys that you plug and play at the guard spot for the most part. At least I think it could be set for a while. I felt that way about Tristan Wirfs as well. He ended up sticking at right tackle and is still there as a Pro Bowler. Do you think Jordan Morgan has that potential if he sticks there at the outside?
I mean, he's 6'6", 320. I don't know what his arm length is, and I guess that would be the big question here. Do you happen to that? But like that would be the concern.
His arm length, he is oh gosh, let me see. It was he got a 32-inch arm, so not even 33 inches, and an 81-inch wingspan. The arm length of 32 and 7/8 is actually like bottom 10th percentile. So like out of 100% of all the players that measured at the combine, he's 9 out of 100. You want to be like 99 out of 100. That is really short. There's other guys who have gone into the league and been successful with shorter arms, but a lot of times it's not necessarily at tackle, especially at left tackle, which I think is really interesting. So I'm really curious to see what goes on. It's been a long time since we've seen guys with shorter arms. Even La'el Collins, I think, was 18th percentile. Dwayne Brown, I know, is still in the league. I don't remember if he had his arms measured or not. The guy who I think had the most success with shorter arms was Joe Thomas, but it wasn't that much shorter. I think that would be the one caution, is you want to make sure if this is a guy you're drafting that high and you're wanting to start at that spot for Jordan Morgan, you're going to want to make sure, at least, because that's the one thing about arm length, is like we always say, if you got a short-armed offensive lineman and you hit them in the chest with that pass rusher, and they got long arm pass rushers, what you talk about, you're going to have to be able to be so quick at resetting. And other times you get your hands on a guy who's got shorter arms. It's part of why you'll see some guys who just will end up being moved to the interior coming out of college who were tackle, because they were the best player at their college, best lineman. You line that guy up against the best pass rusher. But in the NFL, everyone's got long arms now, and you got to make sure you know that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And this is part of the process of learning this draft class, which is what Mock Draft Monday is great for all of us about. And I hadn't looked at his arm length before. Now, that you usually want at least 33-inch, and that's kind of the bare minimum for tackle in terms of arm length. You mentioned Joe Thomas, and the thing I always heard was if you're a tackle and you have shorter arms, your technique has to be pristine. Right, has to be flawless to pull that off. With Joe Thomas, we know about him. So you probably look at him, say you try him at tackle, but have to be prepared that he might end up falling into the guard spot. Which that's the thing about drafting tackles, right? If they don't work at tackle, it's lower risk because you can move them into guard and if you get a good player that way, it's not what you'd hoped for, but what have you. And this leads me to think Monty would not take him at this spot, even though I took him,
Yeah.
because I think he does not take guards, like I said before, round 3 and ideally round 4. And if he doesn't see him as a tackle, he's going in a different direction, probably. So
Yeah.
that's a really great point you raised
Yeah.
there with Morgan.
And Morgan had a good broad jump with vertical, but he didn't end up running the 40 and didn't end up running the 20. I think the 20 yarder, I think, with the shuttle. So when you don't have some of the measurements like that, but maybe get stuff from his pro day, which sometimes, it'll be like a little faster or it'll be just kind of a little bit more juice. It just doesn't feel like it's a fit that's meant to be, despite the fact that he is a stud at Arizona. I think if they did take him here, my assumption would be they signed a starting left tackle, like someone like Donovan Smith, for a year, and you're going to kind of just say, hey, we got our starter for a year. Let's go for talent wise. We're going to bring this guy in because we think he can be a stud on the interior for us with that run game. I could see that being more likely the pick if it was here. I just think that you're probably going to look at the positional value and say, I'd rather get a guy who's an offensive tackle while I have that first round pick to be, or even a top 30, 40 pick, at least with second round, which is kind of what you did here with round 2, pick 35. I think that I would lean toward that with Monty, but I agree with you that I could see that being a pick because I could see there's multiple ways to build a team. Jonathan Brooks is probably the top running back in this draft, if not for a torn ACL that he's coming back from. He's a fun type of player. It'll be interesting to see, like you said, I find myself liking some of the start of these running backs. There's not going to be one that goes in round 1. Maybe we see the Florida State kid go in round 2. But Brooks is probably one of those guys who would have been probably the highest one drafted if not for that tear. He's going to see how the medical checks look. Do you feel like it's a good bet that you could get maybe surplus value a bit later with getting a guy like him, who's, I think he's about 6 foot, 210 pounds or so. He's also another young back at 20 years old. Part of why I really liked just getting some of these guys who are super young. There's a lot more room for a lot of carries versus drafting that guy who's been running back in college football for, 3 to 4 years, longer than some of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at it, like they took advantage last year of some players that had some injury history in the 3rd round, right? Michael Wilson.
Yeah.
So I think Monty is Garrett Williams, right, as well. So I think Monty has shown, at least last year, that that's something he looks at in round 3 in particular is a good place to do that, right? Get guys who would have been borderline first round picks. You could argue Williams. Some people thought he would have been up near the top or back end of the first round, at least second round picks, if not for the injuries. So I could absolutely see them continuing with that trend. And then, Brooks, he doesn't have, he had the injury and he also doesn't have a lot of tread on them tires. He's young and, played behind some running backs there in Texas that were pretty good.
Bijan, Roshan, just the biggest one is if he gets a speed back from the ACL, it might be a Garrett Williams type thing. If the guy's got first round tape, but has 3rd round injuries, at least for impact, I wouldn't mind that at all.
So absolutely.
Junior Colson. Now this is one that I don't know if the mock drafts haven't caught up yet, but I believe he is Dane Brugler's number 1 or number 2 ranked linebacker. There's not as many linebackers going early. Colson at I think he's about 6'3", 6'4", 247. He at that size is a coverage type of linebacker. So you're talking about a guy with size and speed. It's one of those guys that you draft him to cover the Trey McBrides of the world. I think that's a great spot to be able to plug into it because you do have, I think, at least a need after some of these guys to come in. I also am looking at the next player you have there with Devondre Sweat. He's one of those guys that stands out. A lot of people watch Byron Murphy. He's a guy that I think people have slept on quite a bit as well. Whereas with Kitchens, that's going to be really interesting to see what goes on with him because I think the biggest case with him is that he's so great with being in a safety role, and he does fit probably a 2 safety defense a bit more, but he didn't have the best combine overall, or at least as far as the Senior Bowl, some of the measurables. He's got good hands. He had a 4.6 40 with safeties, depending on your usage. It's not too bad, but usually if you're going to be a 4.6 safety, you'll want to be kind of that hitter, like a Cam Chancellor is a guy who's not going to maybe blaze like a Buda Baker's 4.4. but you want to then have a guy who's a big hitter who can have some of that size and coverage in the run game. He came in a little bit smaller, at least than some of the other guys expected, at only 203 pounds, and he did not have a good broad jump. So you're probably talking about a guy who has to be in a 2 safety role. It's not going to be as fast from side to side, and as far as for that explosiveness,
Yeah.
it's going to be really interesting. I think I'd probably say you'd look for him on day 3 would be one of the spots there. And I haven't done as much research, to be honest, at least on Sano and Jawan Briggs, at least. Remind me with Josh Wallace, is he used as more of an outside corner for the, because I watched Michigan play this year as far as for where it played, but I was more looking honestly at Junior Colson than it was at him, because I figured if there was a Cardinal that I felt like to fill like that Mike linebacker spot who could also cover, Colson is one of those guys who fit the bill really well.
So that's a good question. He's 6'1", 190. I'm actually kind of going to his profile now to see. Here we go. In terms of, he played mostly outside last year, in 2023, 493 snaps on the outside versus 59 at slot. So he is in that for the last 3 years. He's been primarily an outside corner. So you're getting the guy, and his grade, 86.5 PFF grade last year.
3-time team captain. That is something it was important to Steve, but also was important to Monty. You look at some of the team captains that they drafted previously too,
and has good games against good teams. I'm looking at right now, like he posted a 75.7 against Bama. Right, a 67-1 against Ohio State. Has some down games here and there, but like has had good games against good competition, which is a thing you like to see. 70.1 against Washington, 75.5 Penn State, but that game against Bama. So, that's a guy you look at, a late outside corner from a good program, good games against good teams, good size. So yeah, I think that, and I wonder if he's going to end up moving up the board, or if there's, I haven't looked at his athleticism. I wonder if he's just, if there's a speed or something like that that's keeping him from going earlier.
Yeah. Also, one correction, at least Drew McWhorter in the comments is right. It was Dallas Turner was the one, at least, who was there. I think you were about to mention that to me. But yeah, it wasn't Chop Robinson. Dallas Turner. Chop did have as fast of a 40 as Dallas Turner did, essentially. So that was part of where it was. So good. Thank you for that correction, at least there for the most part. The last one with Hayden Hatton. What was part of the reasoning for this role? Because I think you were just looking at finding a bigger guy who was late round. And there's also one other reason I can see very particularly that would endear him to a lot of Cardinals fans, and that's from his hometown, right up the road in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah. So, and looking at, and I'll bring it up real quick, and I've talked about this, the almighty chart, right? This is kind of the New England, Tennessee time with Monty and front offices, plus added Arizona's picks, kind of just a heat map, so to speak. And you look at wide receiver, they like to pick them, all throughout, but 4th round and 7th round, they like to kind of get some extra wide receivers there. So really what I did is in the 7th round, or, late in the draft, I was looking for a receiver, and I was looking for someone a little bit bigger. So I brought, and I've picked him before, 6'2", 205, posted a PFF grade of 90.5 in 2023 and 91.8 in 2022. His 2021 grade was 70. Now, again, this is against, lesser competition,
Yeah, it's
but
FCS school, which is always a little bit different when you're talking about the Idaho Vandals. It's like, all right, NIL money flowing through Idaho, right? No, it's a good state.
But if you are looking for a guy in the 7th round, and you've got a guy who has decent size, 6'2", and has produced, and you're taking a flyer, that's a guy that's worth considering, right?
Yeah, it'd be like if you're thinking of Antoine Wesley from a couple years ago, at least. That was one of those guys, 7th round draft pick. Cardinals came in. He had a couple of decent games for the Cardinals. Hasn't been able to stay healthy, but having at least, he's got obviously way bigger size at like 6'5" and some freaky long arms, but bringing in one of those guys that has that size and that weight to be able to kind of move around in some of the 5'11", 190 corners, that's not a bad spot, at least, to go ahead and take a flyer on that and have one of those guys like that for your special teams too.
Yeah, and Dana posts a lot of really good stuff in the Discord. And here mentioned she likes Joshua Cephas from UT San Antonio. And I'm looking at him right now, and the one thing, and he's a guy who really good grade. Again, the competition a little bit lower.
Yeah.
some decent. I mean, they played Tennessee, a few decent teams in there. Played where they played the Mean Green, North Texas, where I did my grad school. But the one thing, and I'm looking at him, that is the concern is the contested catch rate of 26.3 is an orange dot, which isn't good. And he's a 6'3", so nice size, but those contested catch rate is a thing you kind of look at a lot of times with college.
There's a reason for some of that, I think, too. He's 6'3", but at 185, he's going to be a little bit smaller, at least. So that's going to be an undersized, is what you'll look at it. There's some guys who can make it easily, but you had to kind of bulk up with someone like a CD Lamb, had to kind of bulk up to get to that spot. Like you said, that's probably part of the reason why, at least if he's being used also out of the slot, like you said, contested catch rate. Sometimes you have guys who, when they get moved into the slot, they'll have some decent speed at that level. They'll have maybe some size if you're throwing over the middle in the slot for like those big slot rolls. But you also can go into the slot and don't have to deal with press coverage. You can get mismatches up on with linebackers and safeties if you can kind of use the slot to manipulate. It's part of why Larry Fitzgerald, when he went into that spot, he was a good blocking receiver, but also you didn't have to worry about Larry having to have that same burst he did when he was younger, because he was just in the slot and was able to not have to get, this super athletic first round pick at corner pressing him all the time. So that is, like you said, one of those concerns you can have is how does the guy's game translate, not at the college level, but to the next level.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Blake, before we get you out of here, because we've already got an hour and 20 and I've still got all the other mock drafts from the viewers.
Yeah, you got to get to it.
I got some work to do, but is there anything you want to kind of touch on that we didn't, or anything you want to share or shout out, anything that you're working on, any parting shots you want to get at before we let you get out of here?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can actually get back to it. We've got the Redbird Reboot podcast, of course, with a new video intro. We're seeing if we can line up something special also in the fall, which will be at least very fun. I'm on that, of course, with a fellow person from AZ Sports Underground and Marcos Labrada. And I'm trying to work through with my quarterback rankings this year to catch up. So every year what I would do is I would have a kind of production and thresholds heavy looking at a lot of the players, and then also analyzing specific games they played against tough competition. Everyone can always just thrive when you're playing in like the worst teams, but how did guys do against some of those top ranked teams? Being able to put that together for this year's draft class and kind of comparing it to previous thresholds. This is one of the first years we've got a guy who his production is actually going to probably push Kyler out of being one of those top 5 guys that I've scouted in Caleb Williams. And it's going to be really interesting to see at least how that production for the most part measures up. Kyler has been in there for the most part, but other guys like Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Mahomes and Watson obviously were already there, just as far as for high producers against the toughest competition. Caleb's going to be interesting to scout this year. He may be the first guy that pushes, Kyler out of it, but we'll have to see how those Notre Dame games play. I'm excited to kind of put all of that together to kind of get a full profile of if these guys can succeed or not. It's really interesting to see how the NFL has just shifted over the years, and some things have stayed more and more the same, such as a Heisman winner going in an early first round, and we'll see how that goes with Jaden Daniels and whatever team he lines up with.
Absolutely. Well, if you aren't following Blake, make sure you do. Follow him on Twitter. I've got links to your Twitter account. I've got links to your writing. Make sure you check out the Redbird Reboot podcast with Blake and my good buddy Marcos Labrada, who does some great work with the film study and good work that you guys do over there. Drew saying thanks, Blake. Have a great night. So Blake, it's always a pleasure when we get to hang out. I always enjoy talking this stuff with you. We'll be doing this again at some point for sure. But thanks for jumping on with me. Have a great night, and I look forward to next time working together.
Thanks so much, Joe. Have a good one.
All right. See ya. Peace. All right. Now it's time for your mock drafts. All right. Let's jump right into it. We have hiding out now. He did this one late last week. And I don't know if this was a serious one or not. He had a comment in the Discord, like PFF must be smoking something, I think. But I posted it anyway. So I know he went tackle early, then went cornerback, Rick Straw Jr. at 27, Jane Daniels quarterback. So now this is interesting. Obviously I'm not doing that. I don't think they're going to do that, but the Patriots, we keep looking at the Patriots, what they do is a kind of a model for what Monty might do. And they did have a tendency to take quarterbacks second and third round when they had, when they had their kind of dynasty going, right? But I don't think they're going to do that now. It's one thing if you got Tom Brady to kind of develop a guy and then, they trade him. But I think this team has too many needs for them to use a premium pick on a quarterback right now. But it's not out of the realm of like what we would see with New England, right? Receiver in the third round with Xavier Worthy. Then we got defensive interior with Rook or I know I did that on purpose, right? And then we got guard Mason McCormick in the third round. So he's did day one and day two. Yeah, I think this is a very different, mock draft. Yeah, probably not a lot that I think that the defensive interior in round 3, I really like the guard. They, potentially the rest of them aren't, the cornerback, that's also an interesting, pick that we might see. The tackle, I don't think they go tackle that early. We talked about that earlier. I don't think they go quarterback that early, but yeah, interesting stuff. Next up, we have Brian Sinister, who I think is in here. Brian's got Marvin Harrison Jr., 4th overall, of course. Then Brock Bowers falls to 27, which is really like, I don't think that'll happen, but that would be amazing. I mean, if this happened, that would be a heck of a first round. Hey, there he is. There's mine. So listen, if Brock Bowers somehow falls to 27, like I'm running up to the podium, right? Then we got Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle at 35, like that. Mike Hall Jr., another defensive line at 66. Right. Maybe with what they did today, we might not see that many defensive linemen that early, but I don't know. Then at quarterback, Chris Abrams Drain. So what quarterback pick 71. Then went offensive tackle Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame. So getting that right tackle maybe a little bit later, right? Unless he ends up getting moved to guard, but that's the spot, we could see that. Braylon Allen, running back Wisconsin. Last week, there was a lot of people talking about him, really like him. So that's a nice pick there, right? Getting that running back. Receiver Jacob Cowing out of Arizona, kind of a smaller receiver. I don't know. I don't think they'd go receiver at 137. They like going later. Well, they do take them all throughout the draft. So I could see them doing that. I just don't know they take someone that size there. I think they might wait later, but I don't know. We got another safety at Miami, Florida, James Williams. The other safety I took Kinchins in mind, right? Cameron Kinchins, James Williams here. So we like the idea of a safety there, right? We got linebacker Jalen Ford out of Texas, right? Getting a linebacker there. We got another interior offensive line, Mason McCormick out of South Dakota State. So again, kind of developmental guy. Edge rusher, developmental edge out of Clemson, Xavier Thomas. And then Storm Duck. We got Storm Duck cornerback. Automatically wins because of Storm Duck, right? It's really tragic Storm Duck didn't play for Oregon, right? Cornerback out of Louisville. So, yeah, listen, I don't think it's realistic to get Bowers there, but boy, I would love that. But obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., love Byron Murphy. A lot of people think he's going the first round, though. It'll be interesting to see. So, yeah, overall, like what you did. I like going tackle a little bit later since we're seeing that as more of a, right tackle down the road, later in the draft. So overall, yeah, good stuff. Yeah, Darkwing Duck sidekick, right? Awesome. Good job, Brian. Now we have Chris Young, who I know has been in the chat, right? So he's got a trade back scenario, went with Dallas, got the edge out of Alabama. I kind of like that. I mean, I think I've done that in my mock draft last week, trading back and getting an edge, or I know I've done that before. As much as we love Marvin Harrison Jr., getting an elite edge rusher is something that this team really could use. But I got a bone to pick with you, Chris. Yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. was gone. Decided to play. That makes sense. But listen, man, come on, Chris. You're in the Discord. You know better. Center at pick 24. I know he's great. I know Jackson Powers Johnson. Everyone loves him. But no, the almighty chart says no, we don't go interior offensive lineman before round 3, right? Yes, C took an interior offensive line too early. The almighty chart says no to you, Chris. But yeah, emphasis on playing around. Yep. Nice. So yeah, listen, Jackson Power did not follow the teaching of the almighty chart exactly. No, but he's a great player. Watch Banished to the Shadow Realm, right? Nice. So, watch Monty prove me wrong with this and go. But last year he didn't go into your offensive line till fourth round, and until I see him take one before the third round, we will say that the chart has spoken, right? But good player though. Kamari Lassiter, cornerback, round two. Now that is in keeping with the chart, because the almighty chart says that cornerback in round two is one of the really kind of the sweet spots there. T'Vondre Sweat, we got defensive tackle at pick 38. So I took him later in my mock draft. We'll see where he ends up going. So whether that's early or late, whether PFF has him too late or you have him too early, we'll see, right, as time gets closer. But definitely like the player. You have wide receiver Ricky Purcell at Florida. So didn't go receiver earlier because Marvin Harrison Jr. is gone, so you get one a little bit later. Then linebacker Jeremiah Trotter Jr. He showed up a lot of the mocks I do on my, not the ones I've done on the show here, but a lot of them, right? So getting a linebacker there in day two. Then Kieran, I'm not even going to pronounce that name. Red Sea is going to send me a link on how to pronounce it right. The offensive tackle out of Yale, though, getting potential right tackle maybe down the road, so like it there. Getting McKinley Jackson, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M in the pick 93, so no more defensive line help. Bucky Irving, running back out of Oregon, get a running back later. Tyke Smith, Dana Robinson likes Tyke's pick for Buddha Prentice, like that pick. So this is kind of the Buddha era parent, right? Yeah, defensive player out of Georgia, right? They have good players there, in case you hadn't heard, right? So like that. And then Jared Wiley, tight end out of TCU. So, yeah, no, this was a fun mock, right? I mean, you went against the chart, right? For shame, but yeah, you were using Keim's chart. So no, but I really like. I've tended to take a boot apprentice in most of my mocks. Yes, nice. And and I'm also taking safeties in pretty much all my mocks, I think. So no, I like a lot of the players here. I think you mix things up. I like that. I think we all think there's going to be a receiver earlier than that, but who knows? Maybe they don't. We'll see. So good job, Chris. That was fun. Next up, we have Lance Sherrick, who posted this on Twitter. He just did a first 2 days of the draft. Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously Tyler Guyton, getting that tackle out of Oklahoma. The edge just looks a lot like Blake Murphy's first couple picks, except he didn't have to trade up to get Chris Braswell, so got the edge, right? T'Vondre Sweat, the defensive interior lineman. Cedric Van Pran getting a center in round 3, and then quarterback Max Melton, who I know a lot of people like. So no, this is I like this, Lance. I think this is a good mock draft. I will say, looking at Cedric Van Pran's draft kind of scouting report a little more closely, he's a smart player, but like there's a lot. I think some of the scouting kind of reports kind of talk about maybe some limited athleticism, and for the kind of blocking scheme they want, like the lot of zone concepts and a lot of wide zone and outside zone, although they mix it up a lot. Want a guy who's a little bit more maybe athletic, I think, at center, but who knows? Maybe they like him nonetheless. So, but overall, I like what you did here. I think this is a really good first 2 days of the draft. Next up, we have O-Cards. I don't know if you're in the chat, but O-Cards submitted this one. Got some trade stuff going on over on the far right. So some trade back, a couple of trade backs. Got the offensive tackle Fashanu right at pick 15. Then at pick 16, Byron Murphy, defensive interior line. Then got a wide receiver out of Georgia, Lad McConkey, who's really fast, really good receiver, just not an outside kind of 50-50 ball kind of guy, but a good receiver nonetheless. So went with him out there. Then linebacker Adrian Cooper, who I think PFF has him as the highest graded or the second highest rated linebacker. So getting linebacker on day 2. Cameron Kinchins, safety as well. Then TJ Tampa, probably not falling that far, but going cornerback there. Brandon Dorless, defensive line. We like that. Brendan Rice, receiver, who I know they had a meeting with, right? Brandon Allen, the running back we've been talking about. Cedric Van Pran. Is that defensive line? Gabe Hall, defensive. I can't tell. I think it's defensive line. Torrey Taylor, punter at 188. Wow, went with the punter. Well, we just signed Blake Gillikin, so I don't know that they're going to go punter, but hey. Garrett Greenfield, offensive tackle, kind of a later offensive tackle. Then Mason McCormick shows up again in share offensive line. Then linebacker Dallas Gant. They like going linebackers late, right? So there's some nice picks. The trade back was interesting. Getting some future picks, I think, in that. So yeah, I know Dana's saying Edgerrin Cooper pops off the tape, right? Early for Gabe Paul, Dana says, but a good player, right? So okay, mixing it up there though in that first round, right? Getting Murphy and Fashanu, right? A couple trades. So okay. Next up we have Mono 187. I don't know if Mono's in there. I thought maybe saw him earlier. He went offensive tackle. Joe Alt pick 4. I'm wondering if Marvin Harrison Jr. was gone. In that scenario, I'm trading back if it's me, but I know a lot of people like taking Alt there. Then we've got Ladd McConkey showing up again, receiver out of Georgia. I think they really need the big outside receiver, and he's a good receiver, but he's not that. For me, that's not a guy I'm looking at, but he's a good player, no doubt. Kool-Aid McKinstry falling to 35. So again, that cornerback there. Then we've got another cornerback. So doubling up Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon, right? Then we've got Devondre Sweat getting the defensive line help, Brennan Rice. So here we get a little bit bigger receiver. Then we got edge, Mohamed Kamara, right, out of Colorado State. So again, a developmental edge in the middle rounds. More defensive line help, right, with Mekhi Wingo out of LSU. Then guard Zach Zinter. So getting a guard in 5th round to kind of develop. Another developmental edge, Brennan Jackson, Washington State. Safety Omar Brown out of Nebraska. Then defensive interior line Evan Anderson, Florida Atlantic. And linebacker Darius Masau. So, so I think, McConkey is a slot receiver, and I just don't think we're doing that, right? Yeah, no Storm Dunk, right? So it's F Monk. Let's see, more tape. The more tape of all I watched, the more I think he's protected by fast throws and chip tight end blocks. Interesting, yeah. So yeah, I think obviously this was submitted, I think, before free agency started. So defensive line, we're not going to see that many. I don't think we're going to see 3 interior defensive linemen with the guys that they signed. I think we could see 1 to 2. But yeah, and I just McConkey again, good receiver. I'd be surprised if they went with that. They've already got a couple slot receivers. I think they really need that number 1 receiver. Interesting getting a couple cornerbacks there early on. So yeah, those late edge rushers, I think they need an early edge rusher. We talked about that. If they're going edge, I think they're going early, but we'll see. So cool. Well, thanks. Good mock though. We have Brian Gazornik, who's got some trade back scenarios here. Then he went with Fuaga, tackle from Oregon State. So he traded back to 11, went with the tackle. Then at pick 27, he got a big receiver, Brian Thomas Jr. is kind of that next tier. If you miss out on those early receivers, maybe he's a guy you look at later there. Also going Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback. Then also Chop Robinson, a couple guys that I had on mine, right? Then Brandon Doris, so adding the defensive line, then Devondre Sweat, right? Really doubling up, helping that defensive interior line area that as we know, has been a big need. Mason McCormick, guard in 3rd round. Then Bo Limmer, center. So really getting that interior line there in the 3rd and 4th round. Brandon Allen, running back, we were talking about last week. A lot of people like him. Then we get our Malik Mustafa, the safety, the boot apprentice, right? Cornerback Dwight McGlothern out of Arkansas. Then we've got another little trade going on. Halfback Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. And then punter Troy Taylor. So what's up with that? We what about Blake Gillikin? Don't we love him? All right, so Fuaga the Beast. Dana Robinson, A+ draft. Dana really likes Fuaga, apparently. He would maul for awesome. So James Conner. So right. So that could be so a lot of people really like him. Yeah. So that could be an interesting thought if they trade back. Again, I lean towards not going offensive tackle that early for the reasons I talked about earlier, but great player. So a lot of people in the chat like him. So good job, Brian. Thank you for the mock. Next up, Red Sea. Who's this guy? No, Red Sea, our resident draftnik, right? So, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. early on. Then Jerzon Newton. Man, if we end up getting that pick 4 and 27, I'd be very happy, right? Get defensive interior lineman game record there, right? Kool-Aid McKinstry, pick 35. I really like those. Yeah. And then Javon Bullard, he's a safety. I profiled him last week. Again, to me, he's like a, I don't know, like a little bit of the guy that was drafted last year by the Lions. That reminds me a little bit of him. So like just kind of that slot / safety. Really like him, right? And then we've got Adisa Isaac, edge out of Penn State, right? And then Blake Fisher, offensive tackle, Notre Dame, getting that right tackle. Christian Mahogany, guard, right? That Blake had profiled. Then McKinley Jackson, defensive line of Texas A&M. Torrey Taylor, punter out of Iowa. We got a lot of punters getting love tonight, but Blake Gillikin got signed. So yeah, hey, but listen, we love punters around here, right? Oh boy. Ulo Foscio. I'm butchered that, I'm sure. Linebacker out of Washington. Then we got defensive line Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. Jalen Harrell, edge out of Michigan. Joshua Cephas, wide receiver UTSA. Dana loves that. All right, so Redzy said, I follow the teaching of the chart, and this was before free agency. That's fair. Absolutely. So I think you got that right. So follow the almighty chart before free agency. So no, I like it. I mean, obviously those first 4 picks, I love that. Harrison, Newton, McKinstry, and Bullard. I would be super happy. Like what you did getting the tackle a little bit later, be a right tackle, right? A little bit later, getting some defensive line depth, like it a lot, right? Dana saying Isaac might be a bit high 71 based on testing, maybe, yeah. Drew saying Johnny would be the 3-down guy. The other rotating on run, pass down, rush down. Newton would obviously come on too. He could play in run and pass downs when needed. Yep. Okay. Overall, no, I really like the first couple rounds there, though, for sure, Redzy. But good job, and you followed the chart. We have Judah, who got this in earlier today. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr., then Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? A lot of those players obviously you can pick up. Chris Braswell, right, who Blake had on his. Then T'Vondre Sweat. So nice slate of picks right there. Got the receiver, the cornerback, the edge, and defensive line. Really hit a number of positions we need help on. So I really like those first 4 picks. Getting Blake Fisher, the offensive tackle, kind of in round 3, getting that right tackle. Then Christian Mahogany helping the offensive line there. Getting halfback on 4, Ray Davis. And then some more developmental offensive linemen. Isaiah Adams, tackle of Illinois in round 5. Drake Nugent, center at round 5, like that. Then AJ Barner, tight end out of Michigan. I think he's a little bit bigger tight end, if I'm not mistaken, more of a blocker, but getting some depth there. And then safety Trey Taylor in the 7th round out of Air Force. This is a really good mock, Judah. I really like it. I like, especially we do the first 4 picks, but then hitting some depth and developmental guys. Maybe a little heavy on the tackles. I don't know if I don't know. Maybe we could use a couple. I don't know if they would go with 2 of those guys, but maybe we'll see. But overall, really good mock. Like it a lot. Yeah, that could be 5 stars with the top 5, right? Yeah. Trey Taylor keeps showing up on all these mocks. I need to look at him, right? Air Force doesn't release that info. Yeah. So overall, though, I like it. It's a good mock. Next up, we have Robert Moore. Here we go. My mock solves all issues. All right, here we go. Robert Moore has got Marvin Harrison Jr. Then we got Jerzon Newton, T'Vondre Sweat, Kieran. I'm not going to try to pronounce it again, but offensive tackle out of Yale. Then Kyrie Jackson, cornerback. Then Makai Wingo, another defensive line. Then Braylon Allen, running back. We're like Dwayne Carter, another defensive line. Sione Vaki, safety. Then Gabe Hall, another defensive line. Braden McGregor, edge. Jordan Jefferson, another. Miles. I see what you did there. All right. Yes. Robert Moore has leaned all in on the defensive line, right? How about one more defensive interior lineman? Yeah. So yeah, so basically no one's running on this team, but that we'll be able to stop the run, but not much else, right? So yeah, you have really done a lot for that defensive line. So yeah. Let's see. Justin was really upset about Matabuki. I'm butchering that too. It looks like, yeah, Brandon, he was upset that we lost on him, so he just went all in, right? Yeah. Nice job, Robert. I see what you did there. All right. Banger mock. Keep them fresh, right? Rotate them in, right? He's painted day one for agency. Nice, nice. All right. So next up we have AZ Sportsman 20. I believe that's Drew here, right? If I'm not mistaken. So he got Marvin Harrison Jr. and then he did a trade up to get Fasciano, the tackle out of Penn State. So getting some offensive line help there. Then Chop Robinson, we've had him in a few, right? Then guard Christian Haynes out of Connecticut, getting some guard help in round 3. Some more defensive line help, Michael Hall Jr. Then Jarvis Brownlee Jr., cornerback out of Louisville in the 4th round. Dylan Johnson, halfback out of Washington in the 5th round. Jalen Harrell, edge out of Michigan in the 5th round. Then Jordan Whittington, Texas wide receiver in round 6. Curtis Jacobs, linebacker out of Penn State. All right. Love Marvin Harrison Jr. getting that offensive line. Mazaki Felix can't get on board with receiver at number 4, even Marvin Harrison Jr. I can do that. Marvin Harrison Jr. I'll take at 4, but anyone else I'm trading back. But yeah. Drew saying, yes, sir, not letting anyone talk me out of tackle pick this year. Going to be a 3 and 5 in the chart next year. Nice. So, but yeah, I mean, I do like Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously a lot there. But I also like Rome Odunze so much that I wouldn't mind trading back and getting him in another starter or 2 out of the trade. But I hear that. Yeah, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. or trade back at 4. That's kind of where I'm at. That's the only player I'm taking at 4 for the Cardinals. Yeah, for Roberts, we'll have the healthiest and freshest D-line in the season. Overall, though, no, I mean, obviously like that. Getting some hit a lot of good spots there that we need. Went a little late on cornerback, but hey, yeah. Overall, though, good mock. Then we've got Get Gannon 2 from Twitter. Had a trade back involved here in this one. Got some picks there from 2025 that we see there in the trade back. Rome Odunze, right? Love that. Trading back in Rome Odunze, absolutely love that. Then Jerson Newton at 27. Love that combo. Then Max Mountain cornerback at Rutgers. Then getting Braylon Trice edge. I know some folks in the chat talked about him as a better alternative to Chop Robinson, which I don't mind that at all. I think he's been more productive, right? So like that. Then Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle out of Washington. So again, kind of a tackle a little bit later. Braylon Allen, again, running back. A lot of people like him. Dominic Puny at Puny. I don't know if that's pronounced, out of Kansas. Now, when I did my player profile, Dylan McMahon talked about that shuttle time. I went through and looked at all the offensive linemen on PFF. Now, looked them up in terms of their combine numbers. Now, a lot of them didn't do the shuttle. That's important to note. So there's a lot of missing times on that. Of the ones that were there, though, Dominic Puny here of Kansas was one of the people that was under that 4.47 threshold. So he's another name to look at there in terms of a guy who has that kind of athleticism that they look for in terms of offensive line. So I think he's interesting. Theo Johnson, athletic tight end out of Penn State. Some folks were talking about him last week. Defensive tackle Gabe Hall out of Baylor. Nehemiah Pritchett, cornerback out of Auburn. And Edifon Olafosio, linebacker at Washington. I'm sure I butchered it. Brendan Trace had an absolutely terrible combine performance. That might pull him back. Interesting. Yeah. Let's see. Got just a couple other comments. Jack Henderson, cornerback in Minnesota. Remember that name late? Okay. Check that out. Drew saying, I would love Rome, AD, or BTJ, or Marvin Jr. there at 4. He's there. He's that special. Take him. Right. Yeah. And then, and the picks, right? Got a future first, couple seconds and a third. So that's important, right? Really nice future draft capital on this one. So yeah, I think this is a good mock. I really like it. There's a lot of things to like about this, right? And I think that Dominic Puny guy out of Kansas is an interesting guy as a developmental guard there in that sweet spot where they like to take them. So that's a player I'm going to keep an eye on as well. We got Breadstick Daddy. We got Austin Hoy, was in the chat earlier. Not sure if he's still here now. He went with Marvin Harrison Jr., of course. Then he did a trade back right out of that 27th pick. Got some extra, picked up some. Grabbed another third rounder and in exchange for that 27 and some day 3 picks. Cloyd McKinstry, pick 33. Then Darius Robinson, edge out of Missouri, so getting an edge there in round 2. T'Vondre Sweat, the interior defensive lineman. Then got Braylon Trice, so a couple edge players. Jalen Wright, halfback out of Tennessee, so getting a running back in the 3rd round there. Cameron Kinchins, a guy who I got in my mocks, again, that safety. Then Chris, cornerback out of Missouri, and then center Drake Nugent. So overall, I like kind of what you did in terms of the first 4 picks in particular. Couple of nice picks there later on as well. Let's see, Trice didn't test well. Good film, right, is what Danny's saying. So yeah, overall, I like this. I think this is a good mock. Red Sea sending me a link to learn Edifuan's name. Okay, thank you. He did that for me last week on someone I butchered too. So overall, Austin, I think this is a good mock though. Nugent's another interesting guy. I think he has. I need to look. He might have been another guy who had that shuttle threshold I was looking at. So Jack Dong saying T. Higgins and coming. Okay, is he? Yeah, I don't know. Did something drop news-wise? And there we go. We got through the mocks. Ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten through another Mock Draft Monday. This one is a little more marathon. We got through a little quicker last time, but this, we got a lot of good conversation about free agency with Blake Murphy early on, getting our player profiles, and got covered a lot of ground. So we're going to wrap this up, but mock draft season is upon us. Mock Draft Mondays is here. We're going to be doing this every Monday between now and the week of the draft. So make sure you're getting your mock drafts into me in the Discord or on Twitter. If you aren't part of our Discord server, check it out. There's a link in the description of the video. We have a great community there. And I thank you all for being here, hanging out with us. Brand, fun mock draft Monday, hefty spring break. If you're on my mock draft, or my spring break starts next week. So I will be on spring break next week. Going to use that time to get a little bit of a break and also prep for some conferences. Good times. But thank you all for being here and hanging out with us. I'm going to get the shout outs to our channel members up, and we'll get the theme song as we roll out of here, and we will see y'all later. Peace.
Hey, yo, it's Joe Mo. He's the host of Mock Draft Monday on the Cardinals show. So join the live, hit like and subscribe. Enjoy the podcast tonight. Enjoy the podcast tonight.